Hi everybody, today's podcast guest is Big Al and we're going to be talking about school to prison. So this podcast is a little bit different to my normal podcasts where my guests have normally been in prison serving time, where today's guest, Al, he's been in prison, but he goes in prison to help the prisoners and try and help rehabilitate them. But Al, could you just give a brief description who you are and where are you from?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Al McGregor, and I'm very much about using this tool called Lego Serious Play and using it in prisons and helping people to get some of the stuff out of their head into these Lego bricks, work through some of the stuff. It's a communication tool. So I've kind of done this with police and I've worked with some military. I'm a teacher, so I used to kind of spent 12 years inside schools in like deprived areas, and then became a university lecturer, set my own business, and now I kind of work across helping people communicate and communicate subconsciously. And it works. As crazy as it sounds, it works and it lasts and it's having an impact.
So Al's came up today, obviously we're having a business meeting and we're doing the podcast to get it out there about Al's business, what he does with the Lego. So from my point of view as well, I'll just tell me viewers and subscribers, the ones who might be thinking, what is he on about and what is this business? So from my perspective, Al's business model is all about helping people get things out of their head, communicating, and trying to make them or help them come to terms with maybe some adversity that they face in life and to stop them from reoffending and obviously make them better people. Is that a bit of a fair?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I'll give a bit of a history to Lego Serious Play, right? So it's only 15 years old, and these look like random bricks and stuff that you build, but actually like each brick's been kind of psychologically analysed and kind of chosen. And then you find as soon as you put your hands on it, then actually you build it and then the meaning comes afterwards. So this idea of, we're all very good about kind of thinking about what we're going to do and then doing it. But for people who are impulsive or people who struggle with kind of communication, and I think that's, for me, what I've found is it's a lot of men. We're not very good at that. We're certainly not very good at asking for help at all. And I think, anything where you can start using it as a communication tool. And I think probably if we dive in and talk about our models, actually, I think it's probably the best thing. And I kind of said to Ricky, like, let's talk a bit about the kind of school to prison pipeline, because it is a pipeline. And there's other videos on, that kind of explore that.
Well, we'll talk a little bit, like, obviously about what we are planning to do, and then we'll talk about, obviously, your models and all that. But what we're planning to do together and what we are going to be doing in the next year is going into schools and helping kids who are at risk of maybe going to prison, at risk of getting excluded, and at risk of maybe going on to commit some violent crimes. And with a bit of help and advice and guidance from myself and Al, will hopefully deter the kids from doing that. Because like we've mentioned, Al, it's all about speaking, opening up, and exactly what your business is, conflict resolution.
Yeah.
And my business, behind the bars, education, coming together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've had, a couple of conversations now about owning our stuff and, to be kind of quite open and stuff. It's something I'm still working on. And I think we all are, is that it's often everybody else's fault. Like loads of people we've messed up, whether that's on a big scale or it's kind of violent or it's emotional or if it's in relationships. And it's really difficult to be honest enough with yourself to say, no, I messed up there. And then I'm going to take the consequences of that. And I think, it's if you keep blaming other people, and Ricky was talking about this earlier, then you're never gonna learn. You're never gonna kind of be able to grow. Never gonna be able to progress. And particularly, we're aiming this at schools that are in really tough areas, because it's the same pattern. It's like you've got areas of high deprivation, so there's high alcohol, high drugs, and what's interesting to me is there's not a lot of talking about feelings. Now, for a lot of people, I'm sure, like it's an uncomfortable thing to do. But if you don't, and if you don't know how, it's coming out. Like either it's coming out in 10 years time, or it's coming out in prison, or it's coming out in a relationship, or it's coming out through drink. And actually, I think something we're really missing, and something I've found, particularly with working with police, both in the kind of UK and the US, and working with a lot of military, like specifically kind of looking at the Royal Marines and kind of how some of the more elite units, and was lucky enough to spend some time with the SBS, both leadership, one who's kind of a veteran, and one who was active. And what I'm hearing more and more is when it gets really tough, you need to up your vulnerability, which I was not happy with. Like, I don't know if you're like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, not at all, And I think kind of, we're sitting in the northeast here of the UK, and I'm watching, internationally and stuff. Like, this is a tough area, right? It's a kind of mining area. There's not a lot of money. There's not a lot of stuff that kind of comes in. And that talk doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because I don't think we even know where to begin with that. The only time we ever say something positive is at somebody's funeral. Like, we can say what went wrong, when it went wrong, what mistakes were made, in somebody else, like fine. But actually to be able to say something positive and not take the mick and not, laugh or not, drink, that's really difficult. And one of the reasons we wanted to do the tour and kind of take this to schools is there are a couple of things you can do. And this tool, I think, is by far one of the most powerful ways of doing it. But there's other things you can say and things you can kind of, you can equip staff and equip adults to use some of this language that is hostage negotiation. It's the language that's used when it's life or death. And what I found in my research, partly from academic research, but also partly from experience and, going into prisons and talking to prisoners, is when it really matters, and it does really matter for kids, is one right word to the right kid at the right time can change their life. And the wrong words at the wrong time can destroy their life. Someone who's branded as thick, or thinks that they can't do it, or thinks that they haven't got the confidence to do it. And I think that's what excites me about this, is like, this is a positive tool, and it's in the dark. It works like a light in the dark, and some of the toughest areas. And
a lot of kids around here are in the mindset that I was in. Like you've just mentioned, it's a rough place. The northeast, it's like you say, it's a hard place. There's not a lot of funding for things up here. There's a lot of adversity, and there's a lot of drug and alcohol use. And kids turn to these because it's just the norm around here. In this area, it's just been the norm when I was a kid. It's the same now. And if you don't get out of that rut, get out of that mindset, you're going to end up in prison.
Yeah.
And like I've mentioned, a lot of kids, like myself, when I was that age, I wanted to go to prison. A lot of people can't understand that when they think, how could a kid from the age of 8, 9, 10 want to go to prison? But when you're brought up around this type of area, people have been to prison, you look up to them, and you're just drinking all the time, getting into fights, and violence seems to be the answer. And if you've been brought up around it, you feel as though that's your language, you speak violence. And it's trying to educate people what's going to happen if you don't speak about your problems.
Yep.
And get it all out. And obviously that's what we're going to try and do.
Absolutely. I think the language thing is, you speak what you're brought up around, don't you? And, we had a conversation about our dads, and, it kind of came into our models a little bit. But you're born, no kid chooses where they're born or what they're born into. And I think, you can change in like the language and the kind of communication part of it can, if you can communicate and you can be listened to and you can be heard and understood, my kind of informal, almost kind of projection of kind of what's going to happen is like, you're going to be all right. I think 9 times out of 10, what I've seen is when people bottle it up or can't communicate or can't be honest. And, that's something I still struggle with. And I'm going to talk a bit about micro lies, right? So I would argue 90% of us, if not all of us, tell lies. And I'll explain what I mean by this, because it sounds an awful thing to say, right? But, someone coming home from the pub and said, how many beers did you have? And you had 7, but you say, I had 5. because there's something in it. It's not going to hurt anyone. It's not going to upset anyone. It's not going to cause a problem, but it's not quite true. And I think that starts chipping away at you and actually you can extend that into alcohol. Like you start drinking and stuff, you start spouting absolute rubbish, don't you? Like, oh, I love you, mate. Oh, you're amazing. Or the other way, and like go for someone with bottles, machetes, or whatever it is. So actually, I think we need to start working on our micro truths and saying, like, honesty bits. So like, and I think I'll give an example, right? So it's a difficult thing to do. So we're here recording a podcast. It's going out to a considerable amount of people. But the truth for me is, like, I've had a really tough week. And I'm working on something and going through something, and it's an emotional thing that's going to take me about 6 months. It's a kind of relationship-y thing that's going to take me about 6 months. I know what to do. And right now, it's not to go into chapter and verse. Nobody cares, right? But by telling the micro truth of, yeah, I'm going through this, you open the door for help. And I think that's part of the difference. It's not weak necessarily. It's actually the kind of opposite. And it's very much do as I say, not as I do. It's because it's super hard. But I think if you build walls around yourself, and it's particularly around your emotions and your heart, and you don't ever practice talking about it until someone dies or a funeral. We think about a eulogy. We can do that all day long. Ricky dies, we say these really nice things about him. But actually, like, say it now. Because if you say it now, that one positive word could stop someone dangling from the end of a rope. And you've had, your friends kind of taken his life and said, and I've been around people who have then gone on to take their lives. I'm very passionate about kind of stopping that. And what I'm hearing, it's not just my story, whatever, it's the science of what's going on. So for me, for example, what's going on, it's irrelevant kind of the details of what that is. I know who to go to and how long it's going to take, what to say. And, one tip or one, of the core ones is, if someone's going through something, rather than us try and offer stuff, because that's what we try and do. Well, I've been through this, here's some advice. Nobody wants advice. Nobody, especially not when you're going through it. You don't want advice, and you don't want that kind of, and you don't want sympathy, and it's not, a pity party. If you say to them, what do you need? Like what do you need right now? And so my kind of, my business partner, Mark, who is great, said it to me yesterday, what do you need? And I was like, to get on with it for the next few days. And then let's talk about it next week when I've got a kind of a schedule. Had I not said that and let this build up, this is a stressful thing to do with being recorded, like it's kind of whatever, and then onto something else, and then onto something else, and then onto something else. In 2 weeks' time, I'd take someone's head off. Not literally. But,
I hope not.
But you can see how that starts and stuff. And I think if we lean towards, if we're kind to ourselves and say, look, we're not bad people because we tell micro lies, and we're not bad people if we're trying to protect someone. And I think when it comes from a place of protection, that's very different. But if we lean towards these micro truths and kind of helping and communicating, getting stuff out, and why I'm so passionate about this tool is like, there are 202 people who are breathing because of this tool who would not be here. And that kind of resonates with my purpose. And I know this is working in prisons. And if the kind of guys and girls kind of behind bars can spend their time building through the positives and learning these things about micro truths and owning your stuff and actually kind of harnessing the light and being able to kind of build your own positivity without having to go to someone. Lots of people coming to Ricky for, the gym stuff and the book and mentorship, and, is an incredible positive force there. Who's there for him? For starters, who does he go to and what does he say? How do you do that? And what example are we setting to our kids? Because this school to prison pipeline is the cycles repeat. So if your kids see you not talking, they're not going to talk. Do you know what I mean? And we don't have to fall apart and cry our eyes out all the time. I'm not talking about that. I said just this culture of openness and honesty and authenticity. And I think this tool for me and the way I use it, hopefully, is bringing that to people.
And like you see as well, around these tough areas and neighbourhoods, a lot of the kids have had a bad upbringing. They've never had a good start in life. People that don't know them, see them getting into mischief, just write them off, call them worse than shit. Don't give them a chance in life. They end up in prison. They get treated like shit in prison. And it's just a life of prison and adversity. And it just, if people can see it from a different point of view as well, try and give these kids a little bit of help, like what we're doing, then it's going to change their life, change their mindset, and it lets people see things in another point of view as well, from a different perspective, instead of people would look at my channel and say like, oh, he's been to prison, he's a worthless piece of shit. But then when they get to know us, see me stuff on the channel, then they think, oh, I've changed a lot of people's mindsets about prison.
Yeah.
Because everyone thinks prisoners are all the same. But if people are given that little bit of hope and a little bit of a chance and speak about the problems, exactly what this model does, and it's going to open up a better lifestyle.
Absolutely. And I think, it's, for me, what I've seen is the kind of the kindness and stuff and the kind of positive language lands best when you kind of accept the dark bits. And I think there's this thing called post-traumatic growth that's now kind of out there of, you've gone through something awful. So I'm thinking of, the first kid I ever interacted with as a kind of teenage mutant ninja teacher, like, let's call him David, right? Came in and he was there at school at 5 a.m. And he was there at school at 5 a.m. because he was starving. And he was being made to eat pet food, by his mum, who was on a mix of alcohol and cocaine and all kinds of other stuff. And he came in and he was ready to go. He was like, right, let's do this. And as he kind of grew up and progressed, he kind of took the idea of him looking after his siblings and how shit his life had been as energy and fuel to do something good for someone else. And I think that's an interesting part. It's almost because of the shit he went through, he's better. Nobody's watching Ricky Killeen if Ricky Killeen had never been to prison. So actually, this channel exists because of post-traumatic growth. I know Ricky in a minute is going to talk about his model a little bit about the kind of aha moment where it's like, right, okay, now I've got to get my shit together. But all that trauma and all that kind of stuff, it's if you harness it and communicate around it as you recover, not correctly, but in the right way, I guess, then it can turn into the biggest growth, whatever. But we don't, because we can't even talk about it, let alone actually ask for help. We're so far away from that. It's that's something else. I think this does is like, one, you kind of own it and kind of face up to it, and then you start going, right, how can I use this to help other people or do something with other people? But you can't even get anywhere near that unless you can. I would say even communicate with yourself, which I think is what alcohol gives you. And alcohol gives you that you can detach those two things, so you don't need to think about it. And if you're not thinking about it, then you're not working through it and you're not owning it, which means you're just going to repeat it or worse. And that's, I think, the trap that a lot of kids are falling into. A lot of people are falling into, isn't it? There's a lot of very successful professional people who are very much have become victims of alcohol and stuff and are just getting on with it in that kind of British thing that we do. We're not great at that, are we? But yeah, the idea behind this tour is to kind of go in together and
I think with the model as well, obviously, when you do it, you're all like working by yourselves. You're in the group, but you're all building your own little models. But I think at the end, when you come together to solve a problem, I think that is what is going to benefit a lot of people the most, because kids and a lot of adults will look at this and think it's quite hard to understand at first.
Sure.
But what they will get from it when they're all together in the group, collectively coming together to solve a problem at the end, and then it's giving them the tools to think, hang on a second, I have got something here, and they can actually give something back in turn and help other people with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to talk about your model? Right.
So my
do you
model,
want to hold it up?
I'll ask us to do a model of my childhood and me looking up to my father. So the model is me looking up to my dad. Opposite is obviously some bars, which represents prison. And there's a little skeleton there that represents violence, prison, and that life cycle of violence and prison.
Absolutely. And then I kind of passed over a piece to him, which is the turtle, right? This little kind of turtle, which seems a little bit crackers, but as I was listening to it, I was like, the patience, I think, afterwards that he's shown, and that moment, I think, when you owned it, wasn't it? Like, I think, were you in Durham or was that in Franklin?
I was in Franklin prison.
Yeah. Of that moment where you'd stopped and kind of reflected to the point where, like, actually, I don't want to do this anymore. And, you just lost your best friend and stuff, and you kind of went for it. but yeah, and then it's when someone builds something like that, like it's out of Ricky's head, and we're kind of looking at it, and it really resonated with me. And I did the same thing. So my kind of question. So I built, I actually used the same piece for my dad as his dad without even knowing it. I only just kind of figured that one out. And I've got a kind of Lego guy there, a Lego girl, and a Lego piece that represents my mum, and then me and my dad kind of holding the whole thing together, which he did kind of really well. But it meant that he was so busy doing that there was almost kind of, I was just off on a limb and like just not happening. And it's really ironic that now I'm talking as a kind of professional and as kind of at 41 about everything I've said so far. I did the total opposite. And from 11, like my mum was really ill at 11 and kind of got sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker, and then died. So I wasn't talking to her, I wasn't talking to him, I wasn't talking to anyone. And yeah, I think when you start kind of building those walls, like you're destined to fail. Like we can't do this life by ourselves. And yeah, I looked at the similarities and went, what's the commonality here? And we built, this, or I'm looking at like communication. And the idea of there's like a 30 warning sign to slow down, which is kind of a bit, Ricky was saying about being impulsive. I think we're both quite impulsive. And then a kind of communication bubble of how, tools like this can really help. And then you kind of think, right, we could then take this into how would this have been different if you put communication in here at the beginning of that process, or I put communication in, did I actually ever say to my dad, I really want to talk to you? No. I didn't have the language. I didn't have the ability, because I'm sure he would have done, and I'm sure, or was I able to write it down, or was I able to build it out of Lego, or like nothing, didn't do anything. So I said nothing and swallowed it. And then it caused needless harm later on. And that's, I guess, what we're trying to stop, isn't it? Is that needless harm.
Obviously, with my model, my thoughts at that age, looking up to my dad who'd been to prison, I was wanting to go to prison. If you'd gotten them thoughts out and spoke about it to somebody else that analysed your thoughts and said, you do realise what is going to happen, because you're not thinking about the consequences. And obviously, if you spoke about that, got it out, and somebody else from outside said, right,
yeah,
you might listen to it. But me, obviously looking at your model, because people might be thinking like, this is a bit crack as this, but what it'll work as, if you're sitting with somebody who can't open up, and you say to them, right, do me a model of your childhood or whatever, or something that's happened to you in your life. Then you ask them about the model, then they open up and describe it by pointing at it and telling you what it is. So that's the quality of that tool. It gets people to open up who couldn't actually sit there and just look you in the face and tell you about the problems. But by doing that, they've then got to describe it, which then in turn gets it out.
Absolutely. And I think, we've spent really the past kind of 3 years really honing the language, and there's 50 different builds and 50 questions. And it's almost like a formula, like you've got to say the right things at the right time and use the right wording. So it's not, it's simple to just get it and go, but it does take some impact to kind of, get that kind of sorted. But Rick, I don't know if you want to say about, what was your first experience like when we came up and did it next door? Because you had a guy who does a lot of suicide prevention, doesn't he? And he's looking at it, just going, what is this? No, come on.
Well, there was the three of us, obviously. I spoke about it with Al previously, so I had a bit of an idea, but I was still baffled, thinking I haven't got a clue what this means really. But I did speak about it with a couple of people, and one of the other lads that come and done it, I spoke about with him, and he sort of did get it. He's going through a lot of adversity at the minute. He's still with mental health problems. So I asked him to come along to see if this would benefit him. And obviously, John, who's a suicide prevention officer, straight away he was like on the defence, thinking, what on earth is this? This is a load of crap. But I will take a part of it because Ricky's asked us to come along. And then after we'd done the session, when Al had went, I said to the two lads, what did you think? The lad that was really engaging from the start, I'll just mention his name, he'll not be bothered, Scott, who was engaging from the start, he got a lot from it. Because he was actually wanting to interact with it straight away, so he did take a lot from it. He went out with a smile on his face, he enjoyed it. And John had actually changed his mind at first when he was a bit defensive, thinking like, what is this? at the end of it, he was like, wow, that was quite something. He did get it after about half an hour, because he was still, when he was building his model, he was like, I'm just going along with this. But when it was getting analysed and he started speaking about it, he spoke about things that he hadn't actually spoke about before. And that's coming from someone who's a suicide prevention officer. So it just goes to show it does actually work.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the kind of plan is, for schools, I think, just kind of breaking down like what that would look like in a day. Because we've said we're going to kind of go out for about a month, and we're going to kind of target around the north, but we're also going to kind of open it up a bit as well.
But I'll just say, like, obviously, to make it engaging for the kids, obviously, this is why we brought the two businesses together. Obviously, I run a gym, Ruthless Fitness, the YouTube channel, and I've got my book, Behind the Bars, Ruthless Fitness. So to get the kids engaged and let them see something about real life experiences, I'm going to be talking about prison, not glamorizing it, talking about the bad sides of prison, which a lot of people don't do. Kids these days are listening to all the gangster rap, listening to videos on TikTok of people partying inside a prison and thinking it's a holiday camp. But I'm going to be giving them the real life stories about how dangerous prison is and what you will actually, or what I've witnessed inside of prison. So I think that will engage the kids, and then we'll get down to the nitty gritty of the model and get them into it and get them working on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of, as we were going backwards and forwards, we're like, it's also, there's bits for staff, in that kind of, I think, partly from my background and kind of what I've done, as a teacher, but more so with the kind of police military stuff and some of the prison stuff, of giving them some of the tools to almost replicate a bit of what we do. So you get the kind of Ricky part and to hear some of that, like you said, then some of the Lego stuff to kind of understand. And we've said, we'll do an hour workshop each day with kids who are at risk of exclusion. And then we'll do an inset, after school from kind of like 3 till 4, 3:30 to 4:30, to say to the staff, look, we're going to leave you just the bare bones of some of these tools here, so you can continue to do some of this, and you could just use this, as a basic communication tool. And then we're looking at doing some online stuff for parents to help parents, because I think parents get left out. I think school communication back to parents is often one way, and it's kind of back to the parents, and it's usually negative. It's usually your kid has messed up here and done this. And we wanted to kind of flip that round a bit and say, right, actually, we're going to invite you to kind of an online seminar if you want to ask Ricky a question or me a question, or kind of if we've got some different tools or language we can kind of give you that might really help. And we just bundle that all up in a day and say, right, we're going to do this. We're both very busy here, there, everywhere, different countries. So we're going for the month. It's going to be kind of end of January, halfway January to February, isn't it? Yeah. And just pumped, just absolutely pumped from it. And it ties into my why and my kind of core in that, by doing so much work in prisons and stuff, I think it starts in schools. It does start. And if we're not careful, we're going to lose more and more kids to prison. And that's just, I'm just not okay with that as a British citizen. It's just not on.
And again, it's not just prison, it's at risk of harming themselves.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of things that kids bottle up, put them at risk of suicide and self-harm.
Yeah.
So it's going to hopefully prevent that as well as them going down the wrong road and going into prison.
Absolutely. So, we're going to put the kind of flyer out. And if you're interested, or if your school's interested, just drop me an email, put my kind of email out there. And we'll see you out there.
But it's not just like I'll mention, it's not just for the pupils, it's also giving the teachers an understanding as well, because a lot of teachers do just write kids off, like we've mentioned. Don't give them a second thought because they're used to that lifestyle. Like teaching people, they don't look at the kids' backgrounds, they don't see the reasons why they're doing it.
Yeah.
So I think listening to different experiences, they might open their minds up as well. And like you've mentioned, the parents are welcome to come along after the school's finished to do a little bit of a talk, ask us questions, and give them a bit of an understanding, and then give them some advice on what they should do if they see that the kids are maybe at risk or getting into trouble already.
Totally. And I think as well, just a word to teachers, like, it's almost an impossible job. I think kind of having to kind of maintain that positivity and get out there and, you know, like 30 kids of 14-year-olds like, and did it for 12 years. And it's a great job and it's fantastic. But I think even the system, excuse me, the system kind of will grind down even some of the best teachers, you know, and they're the ones who really want to make a difference. And I think some of this can really help that.
And also, obviously, with me book Behind the Bars, Ruthless Fitness, we're going to be talking a lot about that as well. And I think giving the kids something to do proactively after school, getting into fitness or getting into some type of sport is also going to help them massively, because a lot of kids don't. A lot of kids are out drinking, smoking.
Yeah.
And I think if they had that little bit of encouragement to get into something and they could actually see someone who's changed their life through fitness, could actually help a lot of kids as well. So we will be talking a lot about that.
Absolutely.
So Al, I think we've said everything we need to do on that podcast.
Absolutely,
so,
mate.
We're going to continue having a little bit more discussion after the podcast about future plans and hopefully help a lot of people go down the route that I went down, or deter them from going down that route rather. But I think we'll wrap that up here, Al.
Top man.
Well, nice one. Thank you very much.
Yeah.